Welcome in, Hokies fans, to this week's edition of the Tech Sideline Podcast. Got a great show for you. We're going to talk Rail Yard Dogs to begin things, a lot of football content today, and we're going to tell you what to be on the lookout for with upcoming TSL content, some basketball articles, and so much more. That's coming up on episode 296 of the Tech Sideline Podcast, and we get things going right now. We record on Wednesday, May 3rd, 2023 from our high-tech studio at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center right here in Blacksburg, Virginia. We welcome you in, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you consume your podcasts, or if you're watching us on YouTube. If you do happen to be on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe while you're over there, and also turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future TSL content. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. First Bank and Trust Company is the bank that puts you first. Visit www.firstbank.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and introduce everybody on this set. To my right, Managing Editor David Cunningham. Across the way, Senior Staff Writer Andy Bitter. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater, and back behind the scenes today, Carter Hill. Fellas, how you doing? Thanks so much for hopping on today.
Yeah, doing well.
It's good to be here. A little cold today.
Yes.
It's going to feel more like spring in the upcoming days, but this is the last hurdle to get over for the spring, I think.
I was told if I moved to the south, it would be nice and warm compared to Syracuse. And then now that I'm telling everyone it's too cold, they're like, well, you're not really in the south. This isn't like Georgia. And I'm like, everyone said it was going to be warmer.
Well, you're in the mountains.
The mountains skew everything.
That's a good point.
But yeah, doing well. Chris is in England, or he's on his way to England. And Will is
big King Charles fan there. He wanted to get out there for the coronation.
Yeah. For those of you who are Premier League fans, watch Tottenham Crystal Palace at 10 o'clock on Saturday morning. I believe Chris Coleman will be somewhere in the second row.
You'll see him on TV.
Yeah. Will he be rocking Tottenham gear, or will he represent his Virginia Tech fandom when he's there?
I heard he was wearing a powdered wig.
So it's very interesting because one of the things with European soccer fans is they don't you rarely see the true fans wear jerseys. They don't really wear jerseys. They wear scarves. They've got the scarves, but they'll dress up in jeans and a sweatshirt or sweater and wrap a scarf around their neck. Pretty basic clothing and then a scarf. So I assume that's probably what Chris is probably fitting in. He's been there many, many times. He's probably fitting in. He probably knows how to make himself look like a local.
Well, when you're out there being a hooligan, getting into fights, you don't want to get blood all over the jerseys. So it's probably a smart move.
I just find the concept comical. Just think of a crowd of crazy British soccer fans, and then Chris, your favorite Southwest Virginian, in that mix. It's just
he fits right. He fits right in.
Does he? All right.
Yeah, and obviously Will is not here today.
Yes, his wife is getting a root canal, so best of luck to Mrs. Stewart. But the Rail Yard Dogs last night ended up with a big 2-1 win in overtime, take home the President's Cup. Feels like it's a big deal here I know we're in the New River Valley, but up in the Roanoke Valley.
The only disappointing thing, first of all, shout out Chip Grubb, who helps cover softball for us, minority owner of the Rail Yard Dogs.
Is this true? I saw a tweet that Chris Coleman is also a minority owner. Is this true?
I don't know about that one.
Okay.
We might need Chris to confirm this. I don't think he's a minority owner. The only bummer is that Aaron McFarling was not there to write a column about it.
He might have been there in attendance. I don't know. He likes those Rail Yard Dogs.
Yeah, maybe
live hockey.
If he was there as a fan,
live hockey is awesome. I haven't been over to one of those games, but live there's not a greater disconnect between watching a sport on TV and watching it live. If you watch a live hockey game, you will be instantly hooked. And this is my inner Minnesotan coming out here. I'm biased towards this. I've sort of lapsed on hockey because I only have so much bandwidth to pay attention to sports these days. But live hockey, if you go, you will be hooked because it is an exciting thing to watch in person.
All right, what is the best? You were talking about how you used to go to these games. You used to cover this team. it's somewhere in Georgia. Is that what you
Columbus,
said?
Georgia.
Columbus, Georgia.
Columbus Ledger and Choir.
And
in
you
Georgia.
said that they played some awesome fight songs. So what were the songs that they've dropped right when the gloves dropped? What did they amp up?
First of all, that's the only reason that people went to those games down there was to drink beer and then wait for the fights, and they got really excited because this was an exciting game that I covered. It was just one game that I covered filling in, and it was a 5-4 game, and I think the Columbus team rallied to win that one. But the fights, when the fights happened and the gloves dropped, that arena just came to life, and like that the music people were like ready for it because they had like the Offspring, you got to keep them separated. Like they pressed that button the instant it happened, or Mama said knock you out, LL Cool J. Like I think there were a couple fights and they played those songs immediately. So on that their little board of however they do it, they just have it's like fight 1, fight 2, fight 3, play all those songs. But live hockey, I'm all for it. I got to get to a game next year for sure.
All right, well, congrats once again to the Rail Yard Dogs and Chip Grubb. He just seems to be like the biggest Rail Yard Dogs fan, the biggest Tech softball fan. He's all over the place, so and he's one of ours. So congrats to them. Let's get into our football conversation here, gentlemen. First and foremost, some news. It seems like we have new news in this department every week, but some football players transferring out. Cam Johnson out of the cornerbacks room. I'd say maybe the most surprising up to this point guy to say, hey, I'm going to enter into the portal. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think when I look at guys who left and their position on the 2 deep and where they could have been, Cam Johnson's one I could have seen competing for that number 4 cornerback spot very easily. And he wasn't the biggest guy, but, a lot of cornerbacks that have come through here, Greg Stroman, guys like that, weren't the biggest guys when they initially enrolled. So, I think there was growth there in the future potentially, but he was a 4-star guy from just a couple classes ago. So that's one that was a little bit surprising to me. Spoke with Brent Pry, sit-down interview earlier this week. Christian Moss is also not returning to the team. It does not sound like he's transferring. I think he's just going to be a regular student at Virginia Tech. And, they have this first time or new head coaches rule, I think is what it's called, where you can remove somebody from the roster. They stay on scholarship. Brent Pry has up through August 1st. I think it's essentially his first 18 months as head coach to remove anybody from the roster he wants to, but they can stay on scholarship in school, not count against your scholarship numbers for the team.
Okay.
DJ Sims did this previously. I think it sounds like it might be the same route for Christian Moss. But right now it just sounds like he's not going to continue to play football. So that's, since the start of spring, that's 10 guys that have left, or before spring, right before that, 12 if you go back to the start of the semester. Nyquist Hawkins didn't return. Dean Ferguson medically retired. So they're at 83 scholarships right now. They are 82 scholarships, I should say, 3 to play with under the 85 limit, and gives them a little flexibility here to pursue guys in the transfer portal.
I find that very interesting. I was under the impression that he was entering in the portal. Now, was Christian Moss the guy, I think it was, that Coach Pry had talked about, felt like there was a little bit of a lapse?
He was on this podcast.
Okay.
I believe.
Yeah.
Coach
you're right.
Pry,
it was on our
here.
show.
Yeah. When he mentioned that he thought Moss should have, he thought there was more out of Christian Moss, and he was, I believe he was expecting Christian Moss to like walk in his office and basically say like, I'm done. Right. And Christian Moss, this was in between the fall and spring semesters, and he basically walked in and said, I want to do this and I'm committed and blah, blah, blah. So, I don't know. He's a guy.
And then he said he showed it though.
Yeah.
He said he made leaps and bounds.
Yeah, during the winter workouts. He was a guy, I think he's the other guy with Cam Johnson that I'm kind of surprised about. Kyrie Moisten entered. I think I'm a little surprised at that one simply because of the numbers at that position. Like they didn't have a lot of depth there to begin with. But yeah, Christian Moss was a guy who was kind of he was in that 2 deep and he kind of had a role, and then he kind of didn't, and he played well at times, and seemed like he never really found that consistency in that 2 deep. And then of course you bring in this new wave of all these wide receivers, 3 transfers, and Tucker Holloway and Stephen Gosnell improve. Kind of seems like he got squeezed out a little bit. So,
well, and he missed the spring game. He had his hand wrapped, so I don't know exactly what was going on there, but that's the reason he was out for the spring game. So I don't know. It's tough to speculate. I did say when I was talking to Pry, he said that he has had guys come back out of the transfer portal or have changed their mind over things. He's mentioned one guy at Penn State that came back out of the portal and actually started for them later on there. So he's not completely closing the book on anything like that, but it kind of depends on circumstances and how they arrive and how many spots they have if it's possible. So I wouldn't completely close the book on all of these guys, but for a lot of them, I think they've moved on.
I think the other one that's interesting, like you said, is Cam Johnson. He was a guy who was Tech was so thin after Dorian Strong went down a cornerback that Cam Johnson was a guy who was like, okay, he might actually see legit playing time. And when Mansour Delane went and did what he did and started to earn that consistent playing time, Cam Johnson was kind of right there. And then he got hurt towards the end of the year, and he spent a good bit rehabbing. But with Derek Canteen, who, of course, was on the Triumph Spotlight earlier this week.
That's going to go live today.
Yeah. Mansour, Delane, Dorian Strong. You got three solid cornerbacks right there. I think it seemed like Cam Johnson was going to be that fourth guy, he
possibly.
He had that talent to be that fourth guy. He was kind of in the running, I guess.
Yeah, and Antonio Cotman was here early in the freshman class. I think they really liked those young freshman corners who are coming in. Dante Lovett's one of the headliners in this class, I think, and we'll see how quickly those guys can get up to speed. You're not going to have a Mansour Delane every year that shows up in basically July, and then he's starting by October, whatever it was when he took over. That's unusual, which is why I think you see Pride now looking a little bit in the transfer portal, would like to add another veteran defensive back because they sort of have those 5 experienced guys in the secondary. I'll put Delane in that group, even though he's young. He's performed very well last year.
Might be the best one.
Yeah, and then there's a gap, and you look at the backups, and you're talking about true freshman, possibly a cornerback. You're talking about Mose Phillips, a true freshman at safety. It's
essentially going to be pretty much all true freshmen except for Jalen Jones, who transferred over.
Converted wide receivers. So they're trying to find somebody that can bridge that gap between the experienced guys they have on the roster now and sort of the next generation of cornerbacks here.
Well, you talked to Coach Pry. You mentioned your interview with him yesterday. I want to kind of wrap up the transfer portal conversation because you also have listed here some other guys that they may be targeting coming on in as well.
Yeah, there are 3 spots really they're looking at: offensive line, defensive line, defensive back, and they have 3 spots to play with, and we'll see how that plays out here. Offensive line, they're really would take anybody anywhere. I think they don't have great tackle depth. They're still sort of trying to solve that right guard spot. Bob Schick, Jesse Hansen have played there. Caden Moore could move back there if they land a center. I know Troy Everett from Appalachian State has visited here already. The Hokies would like him. There's some, fierce competition to get him out of the portal there. Perhaps the lure of playing close to home is going to be enough for him to come here. Defensive line, I think they definitely need an edge rusher. I think they would take a tackle because they have 3 seniors that are done after this year and that sort of need that sort of next wave of defensive tackles to shore that up. But in the immediate moment right now, they need somebody that can get after the quarterback. They don't have a lot of guys like that on the roster. Antoine Powell-Ryland from Florida, a guy out of Portsmouth who was a pretty highly decorated recruit a couple of years ago. I know they liked him a lot. He visited here yesterday, or at least was scheduled to yesterday. Not sure if actually followed through on that. I would imagine he did, but he would be an excellent addition. There's going to be a lot of competition to get him.
Highly touted, right?
They're looking for somebody that can get after the quarterback because they don't have a lot of guys that have done that before. And then defensive back, as I mentioned before, just sort of a bridge player. They got one in Canteen that's got that versatility to play safety or corner, can do nickel stuff. I think they'd like to find another one like that. Demetrius Hill, I think from Florida International, was one that was supposed to be coming in today. To visit. So that's sort of where they're looking right now.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is I think the DB room is a little bit more interesting because, like Andy said, you're not going to have a Mansour every single year where it's a kid that comes in and basically plays immediately, right? And who knows, he obviously would have played, but had the injury to Dorian Strong not happen, it might have not been as instant. It was more that they needed him because they didn't have anybody else. I'm curious to see where Tech goes to get a guy to fill that void. You mentioned Everett. he's the guy that's been rumored that he might be Tech's next pickup. He's got 2 crystal balls on 247.
He also has an Oklahoma offer.
Yeah.
So and I think he was visiting Louisville sometime this week, possibly.
Yeah.
So there's some competition out there.
Yeah, he's a Lord Botetourt guy. He went to high school with Connor Givens and Hunter McLean, so he's got 2 Tech connections. But yeah, like Andy said, a bunch of big time programs are pursuing him, and I think it goes back to the conversation we've had a lot where these transfer portal guys, especially on the offense and defensive line, if they're highly, they don't even have to be highly touted. They're just a solid player with a couple of years of eligibility left. Colleges are going to swoon over them just because there aren't necessarily that many guys that can come in and fit. I believe it was you or Chris that said, there are only so many big guys.
Large humans are in short supply.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think, like Andy said, I think Tech's kind of narrowing the focus. Now it just comes down to whether or not you can get them. But yeah, the Hokies seemed like, it's kind of wondering, okay, where's all the attrition coming from? And all of a sudden in a couple of days was like, boom, there's the attrition. Like the attrition came and went. And okay, now Virginia Tech's sitting at 82 scholarships.
Something I think people are going to be very intrigued about is the fact that you said that Coach Pry seemed to be very enthusiastic about having Tyler Bowen make the move to obviously he's the offensive coordinator, but now be in the quarterback room as well.
Yeah, he really doubled down on that whole move. He said he's been invaluable in that quarterback's room. This is the quote he had. I think the move with Coach Bowen has to be one of the better decisions I've made to this point.
Wow.
He feels very confident in that move. And, it's not an obvious move. I mean, you're talking about an offensive coordinator he's only 33. He's only been a coordinator at the Power 5 level for 1 year. And it was a dreadful year at that. I mean, it was terrible offensive numbers. There was nothing from those offensive numbers that you look at and you go, yep, that guy is the quarterback's coach of the future, and he's the guy that you want full control of the offense. But Pry is very high on everything that Bowen brings to the table. His football IQ, his eagerness to learn, his consumption of scheme and other things like that. He's just a very curious individual, always wanting to learn stuff. And from a recruiting standpoint, he really likes having him in that room because he thinks there has to be a connection between the offensive coordinator and going out and being on the trail and trying to find these quarterbacks, from a national perspective. You're not just going to recruit quarterbacks in Virginia. Virginia hasn't produced a really good quarterback in a while. That's one of the issues locally that's been happening here. So they're heaping a lot on the Tyler Bowen plate right now, and it's a big bet, and we'll see if it pays off in the future. But Brent Pry is very high on him right now.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, right? Because this is the topic that's gonna, whether Tech does well or Tech does poorly come this fall. I think this is kind of going to be one of the headlines. Obviously, that and the quarterback go hand in hand. We've talked about it so many times before. It felt like there was a little bit of a disconnect between what the quarterbacks were doing and what Tyler Bowen wanted them to do. Like, it just seemed everybody was kind of disconnected between the quarterbacks and kind of everybody else last year at times. And it was interesting to kind of, you only can tell so much from spring ball, but all the quarterbacks, the ones we talked to, when we talked to Grant Wells, he's like, yeah, this move has been great. It's been seamless. I think everybody around the program has talked about how positive of a move it's been. I'm curious to see when it comes to the fall, what that product looks like on the field. And if Tyler Bowen has a better rapport with Kyron Drones and Grant Wells and the rest of the quarterbacks as a result, I think that's a good thing. Again, as Chris has said, Virginia Tech's success probably relies on, it comes down to whether or not Tyler Bowen is a good offensive coordinator, but I think his stock, he can improve as an offensive coordinator if he's closer with the quarterbacks, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does make complete and total sense.
Well, nobody ever says that it's a bad fit. Nobody
true.
ever says that this just isn't working because, I remember in recent years, people extolled the virtues of Tracy Claeys as a linebackers coach. Let me tell you, that was a misfit. Talking to people after the fact, Tyrone Nix is a safeties coach. That was a misfit in hindsight. So nobody ever comes out ahead of time or when it's in the middle of it going, yeah, this just isn't working, especially in the spring when everybody's positive about everything. So like you said, the proof will be in the record. The proof will be in the offensive improvement if there is any this year. Those numbers are hard to deny. So if you see an upshoot in the numbers, then yeah, it's probably working pretty well. And if not, maybe not as rosy as everybody's making it out to seem.
Well, I want to ask you guys and kind of keep that quarterback conversation going a little bit. The order of the quarterbacks, the conversation here, Wells and Drones, what did Pry have to say about all that?
Yeah, it's what you think is sort of what we've been saying here. This was his exact quote. I told those guys, if we played today, which we're not, Grant would start and Kyron would play. But I think we've got two really good ones, which is interesting. I mean, he's basically saying they want to go with the two quarterbacks system. I don't know if it's necessarily an even rotation. It doesn't sound like that would be the case.
Well, the saying is if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterback.
That's true. But, people, I don't know if those sayings are always true.
It all comes down to how you manage that.
Right. I mean, well, last year they had no quarterbacks. They had no quarterbacks. So, maybe this is an improvement to say they have two and have none. I think it's sort of what you expected. And Pry was quick to caution, don't read too much into Drones based on the spring game. He sort of drew the short stick there with the second team offensive line. Couldn't do much behind them protection-wise, things like that. So I think he's encouraged by the progress of that group. Grant Wells looked pretty good this spring. He looked pretty good last spring too. We'll see how that translates to the fall. But I think they're excited about having Kyron in the room, and it'll be interesting to see if that plays out. And I'm saying in this hypothetical game that they don't have right now, that would be the order and Drones would play. We'll see if once they get to the season, if he's thinking the same way that, do I want to take a series or two away from my starting quarterback and put in this other guy in the game? Very few coaches, if any, ever have been able to manage that sort of rotation and have it not be a detrimental thing with the offense. But I think it just highlights the fact that he's pleased with the progress of Kyron Drones so far.
Did he happen to say anything about Pop Watson at all, or his name didn't come up?
He did. He's pleased with Pop's maturity. Okay. He calls him, a little bit mature for his age. Sort of take charge and stuff. He says he liked how he went out there and it was sort of like on a playground. Like he just made plays and he looked comfortable and he was just kind of doing stuff out there. And I don't know if that necessarily you can read into that like he wasn't staying within the system.
Well, he said he got yelled at for that deep throw.
Yeah, I wanted to reference that is that, that's sort of something that you go outside the boundaries of what the coordinator wants you to do. But I mean, I don't know how much they can yell at you and you'd be like, well, I threw a touchdown pass in that play. So what do you want me to do? Not throw a touchdown pass? So, basically my question was, are you concerned about your number 3 quarterback being a freshman? And he sort of talked about, Watson and Whitkey, didn't identify which one would be number 3 right now, just sort of being mature for their ages, having, quarterback quite a bit in high school, won a lot of games like that. So, basically he was saying it is what it is. That's just sort of what the room is like. They like the number with 4 quarterbacks rather than 6, what they had before. And, quite honestly, if they get down to that 3rd quarterback, they've got bigger problems than just, how mature that guy is. I think they could be in for a world of hurt if they have to get down to a freshman quarterback playing right away.
Well, I always go like that. That happens sometimes where a team ends up playing their 3rd quarterback.
How many quarterbacks did NC State use last year? Like 3,
they did, and
4?
that freshman quarterback that played beat Virginia Tech. Looked pretty good.
I hate to. Everyone gets mad when I mention Syracuse, but Eric Dungy was the 4th string quarterback, played as a freshman, and then he got concussed, and they went to a 5th string, and they only won 4 games that season, but. You got to start somewhere, and then Eric Dungy ended up being pretty good and took him to 10 wins by his senior year. So sometimes when they start there, there's room for growth there. But.
Yeah, I think the quarterback room is in better shape than it was a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't have to get many injuries a couple years ago before you're up at BC and Knox Kadam's the quarterback and they can't even complete a pass. Yeah. And you go, this is just not an offensive operation that has any kind of hope. I don't know what it'd be like if they got the 3rd string here, but I think if Kyron Drones had to go in the game because Wells got hurt or something like that, I think they'd be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big thing is they talked about last year how, Jason Brown and Grant Wells were kind of stride and stride, but we could tell that Grant Wells was ahead. This year it actually feels like it's kind of stride and stride. And Brent Pry saying that he feels comfortable with both, that's the impression I feel like I got from watching everything. Like, again, even though Drones did not necessarily have the best spring game because he was not behind the best protection, it seems like last year had Grant Wells gotten hurt, which Virginia Tech was a little bit lucky, I think, that he didn't. You put Jason Brown in the game, and I think Drones is a step up. And that's nothing against Jason Brown, but I think, even the third string quarterback last year was Taj Bullock or Devin Farrell, and those guys, now you've got Pop Watson. So I think that, again, the talent in the room continues to upgrade. Now it's, can you go out and show it on the field in the fall? But yeah, and I do think it's interesting, to your point about just the third string quarterback being a freshman, with Devin Farrell and Taj Bullock gone, not that they had a lot of experience. They'd only ever played in one game combined, and that was Bullock in the Pinstripe Bowl. But there's not, it's Wells, who's been a 3-4 year starter at the college level, Drones, who has limited experience at Baylor, and then nobody else has college experience. So, I think it's important that they figure it out and figure it out quickly. But I think it's good that Pry and the staff are confident about what they're doing.
Last but not least, with our football conversation, you had a section here that was kind of interesting, some odds and ends going on, maybe some position changes and some unsettled things and question marks.
Yeah, I asked Coach Pry any position changes. He brought up Chance Black, and he's like, I've had this conversation with him. I'm not shying away with it. The possibility of talking to him about moving to cornerback. They don't know if they're going to do it. And of course, he says this on the heels of the best he's looked at running back in the spring game, when he had 2 touchdowns and produced on the ground like Bryce Duke did at running back as well. But he was talking about just finding a spot for him to play, and they feel pretty good about Malachi Thomas, Bashal Tootin as 1-2. 1A in some order at running back. And if you're the third or fourth string guy at running back, are you going to play that much?
You kind of need 3, though. Maybe if not 4.
But
he depends on injuries.
Bryce Duke is there. He really liked what Jeremiah Coney did this spring.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's a factor in this whole thing, and considering a move, since Coney just got here, is an early enrollee. And those freshmen, I think that you can play at running back as a young guy. Yeah, there's a blocking component that needs to come along, but a lot of running back is get the ball, see the hole, hit the hole. And a lot of that is instinctual when you're out there. So I think there's possibility for a freshman like Coney, and Pry mentioned him specifically, could get on the field in some capacity this year. But he likes Chance Black's toughness. He likes his approach, the way he goes about the game. And he's like, how can we get you to help this team this year if it's not at running back? And he did some kick return last year. I don't know if he has a background at cornerback or what they see about it. But, they mentioned Jalen Jones in the safety room as somebody who moved over to defensive side, is probably going to be in the 2 deep right now. Could they move Chance Black and do the same thing at cornerback? I don't know. But that's something to consider going forward. He mentioned the right guard spot. That's something they're still trying to figure out on the O-line. He said that a lot of teams are looking for that 6th guy. Virginia Tech's still looking for that 5th guy to round out the offensive line. So that kind of tells you, maybe what they're looking for in the transfer portal. And then, the Mike linebacker spot is just an interesting one to me because it feels far from settled there. And Jaden Keller was a bit of a spring surprise. They have one of the McDonald brothers there. They have Alan Tisdale, Stone Snyder's coming in from VMI. I think they like the depth that they have at that position more so than they did last year, but they don't have like a Dax Hollifield take charge guy. And that's what Pry wants, is somebody who, regardless of whether he's right or wrong with the play call, everybody on the defense is going to follow and do what that guy says. They need somebody to lead that group, and I think that's going to be a work in progress right now.
So, as far as I'm aware, Chance Black only played running back. in high school.
I've never even heard of. I've heard of receivers making that move. I've never heard of a running back go to corner.
But listen, this is how
Elijah Howard bounced back and forth a little bit when he was
this
here.
is how athletic he is. He finished fourth in he's from Georgia. He finished fourth he's from South Carolina, Roebuck, South Carolina. He finished fourth in the 2019 state meet in the triple jump. So he's a track and field guy. He's an athletic. That doesn't surprise me. I do think it's interesting. And the reason this whole conversation came up is because Bill Roth mentioned something about it. And I went and listened to the Level 7 podcast with him and Mike Burnup. And the one after the spring game, and they had inserted audio clips from Burnup interviewing Pry. And one of the things Pry mentioned was Chance Black. So I'm interested to see where that goes. And I think a lot of it maybe depends on a lot of these young guys, right? Like you said, if Coney, they feel comfortable about him being the fourth guy, clearly they like Duke. Well, what about the young guys coming in the DB room? And if they think Chance Black might have more of a chance to play and have an impact immediately instead of some of those young guys in the DB room, maybe that's an option. And I think it's interesting how you mentioned linebacker. I'm curious to see when Stone Snyder gets on campus this summer. When we jump ahead to August. And they're in fall camp, where he kind of falls in the pecking order, because he's obviously somebody that has a lot of experience. But yeah, I think they're kind of missing that guy. They've obviously got Lawson and they've got Jenkins. Who's the Mike? Who does it shake out to be?
Stone Snyder's an A++ name.
Yeah.
For linebacker to begin with, but for Virginia Tech as a linebacker, especially with the Hokie Stone. So many great puns that you can do with the headlines, and I'm sure that I will do on Twitter, terrible puns and stuff like that.
Well, it's a good time to tell everyone that Virginia Tech is partnering with Virginia Green to help create healthy lawns all across Virginia. Register for a chance to win free lawn care with Virginia Green for the 2023 season. Again, episode 296 of the Tech Sideline podcast, presented by both the First Bank and Trust Company and Virginia Green. All right, David, I know you had mentioned that we have some awesome basketball content coming up. What can you say about all of that? A 3-part series in the works?
Yeah, so Drew Scott, former assistant at the D1 level. He's one of our guys on our message boards. He's written some stuff for us in the past. We posted the first part of a 3-part series of his stuff yesterday. He went very, very, very in depth. And essentially what he's doing is this first part, and he wrote about 4,000 words.
Did you have fun editing such a thing?
Yeah, no, but I, to be honest, it's very interesting. And I think people, the feedback, first of all, has been fantastic. I posted it this morning, I believe. It is in-depth, year-by-year breakdown of each of Mike Young's recruiting classes at Virginia Tech. So essentially laying the table. Okay, Mike Young got here in 2019. Here are the 7 players he had. Okay, here are the different guys that Tech brought in. Here's why they brought in these guys in. Here's what they wanted out of the guys. So whether it was the Hunter Couture conversation, or people forget that Keve Aluma came over with Mike Young from Wofford, but he sat out a year because that was before you could transfer and play immediately. That was before that rule was in play. So he did an interesting job kind of breaking all of that down, going through year by year by year by player, and explaining that hey, Justin Mutz was one of the most underlooked guys in that class because he came in with Darius Maddox and Joe Bamisil, and they were 2 guys that were top 100, top 200 guys in the country, high school kids, right? And then you look at Justin Mutz, he was a guy who committed late in the recruiting cycle, kind of over the summer, and it was, okay, well, he's played at High Point, he's played at Delaware, he's a bit undersized. I think people kind of underestimated Justin Mutz, and we obviously know where Justin Mutz's story went. So I think it did a good job kind of summing up Mike Young's first 4 years, just from when he took over and kind of the building blocks, and to now where he's getting the right, you can kind of see a trend of the kind of stylistic guys he's getting into the program. And I don't want to spoil too much, but Drew did a really good job breaking down kind of what an ideal roster breakdown would look like for Mike Young, and kind of you want, this number of point guards and these number of wings, and you want these number of this player, this position, and you want this number of situational players that can do this, this, and this. I thought it was really interesting. So parts 2 and 3, part 2, he's kind of going to go in depth a little bit about just how, now that we know what essentially Virginia Tech's roster is completely set, kind of how the 23-24 roster, with the addition of a couple of additions, Mekhi Long, Tyler Nickel, Robbie Barron out of the transfer portal, how those guys kind of fill all those buckets. And then he's got a third piece that'll come out soon too. And I sat down with Robbie Barron earlier this week. I wrote a feature on him that came out yesterday. Awesome guy, big dog guy. I don't know if you had a chance to read it. I encourage everybody to go check it out at TechSideline.com. It was really cool talking with him, because he's a kid from Richmond, doesn't have any in-state ties really. His mom went to Randolph-Macon, his dad went to Penn State, so he didn't grow up a Tech or UVA fan. His decision came down to Tech in Miami, and his sister, who is 16 months older than him, Anne Marie, she's a student in VCOM here, and so he came down with his U-Haul from Northwestern, came down to Virginia Tech, visited her, went and hung out with Sean Padula, Hunter Couture, and then they went to Mike Young's house, and he just liked it so much. He was on I-64 on the way back to Richmond with his U-Haul in a spot with terrible cell reception, and called Mike Young and told him that he was coming, and Mike Young was afraid that he was afraid that Mike Young wasn't going to understand what he was saying, because the cell service was so spotty. But yeah, I wrote a lot about his dogs, and he's getting he's finishing up his first master's degree. He's getting a second master's degree in applied animal behavior and learning or therapy, something along those lines.
Wow.
Yeah. So he loves animals. He has 2 dogs.
He's got that dog in him.
Yes, that's what you're saying. That's what Andy jokingly told me.
I said that should have been the headline.
Yeah,
that should have been the headline yesterday. Come on.
But yeah, he's a really, really cool guy. Great interview. Nice guy, very down to earth. And on the basketball court, I think he's going to fit Virginia Tech just fine. He's kind of a guy who prides himself on doing the little things, playing good defense. He's going to be used a little bit different at Tech than he was at Northwestern. But yeah, so that's kind of the stuff, the men's basketball content that's been going on. Last week, I went and sat down and talked with members of the Virginia Tech women's basketball staff. So I'm planning to finish my feature and publish that later this week, kind of on what went into their scouting reports this year and why Virginia Tech women's basketball was so good. And Kenny Brooks talked so much about how smart his group is. They had to, and we talked about this a little bit, Gio, I'm sure, where Kenny Brooks mentioned that he had to at times dumb down their scouting reports because they were taking in so much information that they weren't focusing on the basic stuff. They weren't just going out and playing basketball. So it was really cool. I sat down. I spent 2 hours in Han Hurst last week talking with the women's basketball assistants. So that's another thing that's coming out this week. And, of course, Andy has a couple different football things. He's got his mailbag since Chris Coleman wants to go and be King Charles' biggest fan.
I'm taking over that sweet Friday slot.
Yeah.
Chris isn't going to get it back once he comes back. He's going to get Wally pipped here. I'm going to take it over.
So, yeah, tons of good stuff coming out. Jason Stain, Brandon Patterson, I'm sure. I posted a Jason Stain article earlier about an offensive lineman from North Cross in Roanoke. I don't want to butcher his name, so I'm not going to say it, but go check it out on TechSideline.com. He's down to a final 2 of Virginia Tech and Wake Forest. So
He's German, correct?
yes, his
They could get this German pipeline here. Hans Hammer already,
and I believe Hammer went to North Cross too, right? Or maybe he went to a different school in Roanoke. Is it the same?
I can't remember. Clearly, if you get both of them, they're gonna have to be called the Berlin Wall.
Oh,
I like that. Hans Hammer.
See, I'm always thinking this is how I
let's
think
see.
of these things.
Hans Hammer went to, he attended North Cross in Roanoke, so it's the same high school. So yeah, a little bit of a pipeline. Jason wrote that the guy's parents are coming in town this week from Germany, so they're going to go tour Wake Forest again. They're going to come tour Virginia Tech again, and then it's going to come down to his decision. So keep an eye on that.
Cool. Anything from you, Andy, before we let our viewers go?
I just have about 2 hours worth of Filmation quotes to go through from a month ago. It was in the heat of spring ball. I'm like, we'll get to this once spring ball's over. And now spring ball's over. And I'm like, man, that's a lot of quotes to go through. He talks a lot. He had a ton of great stories. I'm probably going to be able to break that into 2 or 3 stories just because it was so much content. But he's quite a character, and it came through in all the stories he had to do. I think people will enjoy that.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for your time. Appreciate it as always. Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to go ahead and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future TSL content. Like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and follow along on Spotify. You can interact with everyone here on Twitter. And again, thanks for tuning in. For Andy Bitter, for David Cunningham, for Carter Hill behind the scenes, I'm Giovanni Heater signing off. We'll see you next time on the Tech Sideline Podcast.